What would you do if the man who raised you decided to punish your conscience by giving you to a slave? In the spring of 1856, on a powerful Virginia plantation, one act of defiance shattered a young woman's entire life. Catherine Ashford refused to marry a cruel slave owner, and in a moment of rage, her father made a decision so unthinkable, so humiliating, it would trap two strangers in a fate neither of them chose. What began as punishment would become resistance. What began as fear would become forbidden love. And what began in chains would quietly challenge the very system meant to crush them both. This is not just a love story. It's a story about power, courage, intellect, and the dangerous cost of choosing humanity in a world built on cruelty. As you listen, ask yourself, what would you risk to do what's right? Before we begin, take a second to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. Like the video if you believe love can rise even in the darkest places. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Now let me take you back to the moment a single act of defiance changed everything. The iron poker crashed against the hearth as Catherine Ashford hurled it across her father's study. "I won't do it. I won't marry Thomas Whitfield, and you cannot make me." Colonel James Ashford's face turned crimson, his thick whiskers trembling with rage. Around them, the mahogany walls of their Virginia plantation home seemed to close in, trapping them both in this familiar battle. It was May 1856, and this was the seventh suitor Catherine had refused in 2 years. "That man owns slaves, father, children. He beats them in front of dinner guests like it's entertainment." Catherine's voice cracked, her hands shaking. She was 22 years old, tall and sharp-featured, with dark hair that never quite stayed in its pins. Her mother said she had the Ashford stubbornness. Her father called it defiance. The colonel stepped forward, his military bearing making him seem even larger than his 6-foot frame. "Every respectable man in Virginia owns slaves, girl. It's our way of life, our economy, our future." "Then your future is damned." The words escaped before Catherine could stop them. The slap came fast. Catherine's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning, but she didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that tears only made him angrier. Her father's voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting. "No respectable man will have you now. You've made yourself unmarriageable with your northern sympathies and your dangerous ideas. I've found you teaching slaves to read, Catherine, to read. Do you understand what that makes you? A criminal, a traitor to your own people." Catherine touched her stinging cheek. "They're not my people, they're your property. There's a difference." What happened next would change everything. Stay with us to see how one moment of rage led to an impossible love story. Colonel Ashford walked to his window, looking out over the acres of tobacco fields where dozens of enslaved workers labored under the brutal Virginia sun. When he turned back, his eyes held a cruel glint. "If you won't marry a gentleman, then you'll marry a slave. Let's see how your principles serve you then." Catherine's breath caught. "You can't be serious." "Isaiah, the blacksmith, tomorrow morning, before witnesses, you'll be given to him. You'll live in his quarters, eat his food, share his life. Maybe then you'll understand the natural order of things." Her father smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth. "Or maybe you'll finally learn to obey." The next morning came too quickly. Catherine stood in the yard behind the main house, her simple dress already damp with sweat despite the early hour. Around her, neighboring plantation owners had gathered, summoned by her father to witness his daughter's humiliation. They whispered behind their hands, the ladies with their parasols, the gentlemen with their satisfied smirks. "Ashford's finally teaching that girl a lesson," one muttered. "About time someone put her in her place," another agreed. "Make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will shock you. Hit that button now." Catherine had never spoken to Isaiah before this moment. She'd seen him, of course, working at the forge near the stables. He was impossible to miss, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark skin that glistened with sweat as he worked the hot metal. The other enslaved workers respected him. Even the overseers seemed wary of him, though Catherine had never understood why. Now he stood before her, his expression carefully neutral. He wore his only clean shirt, though his hands were still stained with soot from the forge. His eyes met hers for just a moment, and she saw something there she hadn't expected: intelligence and a deep, weary sadness. There was no real ceremony. Her father simply declared before the witnesses, "Catherine Ashford, you are hereby given to the slave Isaiah. You'll live as he lives, work as he works, and perhaps learn the value of obedience. Take her." The overseer grabbed Catherine's arm, but Isaiah spoke for the first time. "I can walk her there myself, sir." His voice was deeper than Catherine expected and more refined. Where had a slave learned to speak like that? The overseer looked to Colonel Ashford, who waved his hand dismissively. "Fine, let her see her new home." The walk to the blacksmith's cabin felt like miles, though it was barely 100 yards. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd heard stories, terrible stories, about what happened to white women who were forced into such situations. Her hands trembled so badly she had to clasp them together. Isaiah walked slightly ahead of her, his pace slow and measured. He didn't speak until they were out of earshot of the main house. "I didn't ask for this, Miss Catherine." "Don't call me that," she said quickly. "I'm not Miss anything anymore." He stopped walking and turned to face her. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 25 or 26. There were old scars on his forearms, the kind that came from hot metal and hard labor. But his eyes were clear and direct, meeting hers without the usual downcast deference she'd seen in other enslaved workers. "Force of habit," he said quietly, "and survival." The cabin was small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a single bed in the corner. It was cleaner than Catherine expected, with books stacked carefully under the bed frame. Isaiah saw her notice them. "I know how to read," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I taught myself years ago. If you're thinking of reporting me, go ahead. Can't make my situation much worse now." Catherine sank onto the single chair by the table, her legs suddenly weak. "I'm not going to report you. Her voice broke. "I don't know what I'm going to do." Night fell, and with it came the crushing reality of their situation. Catherine sat on the chair, while Isaiah stood by the fireplace, both of them acutely aware of the single bed in the corner. The silence stretched between them, heavy with fear and uncertainty. Finally, Isaiah spoke. "I'll sleep outside. There's a spot by the forge where—" "No," Catherine surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "You'll do no such thing. This is your home. I'm the intruder here." "You think I have a choice in any of this?" For the first time, anger crept into Isaiah's voice. "You think I wanted this? To have the colonel's daughter forced on me like I'm some kind of punishment for her disobedience?" He turned away, his shoulders rigid. "I won't touch you. That's the one thing I can control. I'll take the floor." Catherine watched him spread a thin blanket on the wooden planks. Her whole body ached with exhaustion and fear, but something else stirred within her: shame. "Isaiah." "Yes." I'm sorry you're enslaved. I'm sorry my father did this to both of us. I'm sorry I've lived my whole life in that house while you—" She couldn't finish. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I wasn't always a slave. I was born free in Maryland. My father was a schoolteacher. We had a small farm, books, a good life." He paused, and Catherine could hear the pain in his silence. "I was 12 when the raiders came. They killed my father, burned our farm, sold me south. That was 14 years ago." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "Isaiah, Don't cry for me, Miss Catherine. Save your tears. We are both prisoners now, just in different ways. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" And that question changed everything. But you need to hear what happened in the weeks that followed. It's not what anyone expected. 3 weeks passed in an uneasy truce. Catherine learned to cook over the small fireplace, burning more meals than she successfully prepared. Isaiah worked the forge from dawn until dusk, coming home exhausted, his clothes soaked with sweat. They circled each other carefully, speaking only when necessary, sleeping on opposite sides of the small cabin. But Catherine noticed things. She noticed how Isaiah's hands, scarred and calloused from metalwork, turned the pages of his hidden books with surprising gentleness. She noticed how he shared his meager food rations with the children who sometimes appeared at his door, hungry and afraid. She noticed how other enslaved workers sought his advice, speaking to him in hushed tones when the overseers weren't watching. One evening, she found him reading by candlelight, his lips moving slightly as he worked through a passage. The book was in Greek. "Where did you learn ancient Greek?" The question escaped before she could stop herself. Isaiah looked up startled. He'd thought she was asleep. For a moment he considered lying, but something in her face stopped him. "My father taught me before. He believed education was the path to true freedom." He closed the book carefully. Turns out he was wrong about that. Catherine moved closer, drawn by curiosity. "What are you reading?" "Aristotle, Politics. There's a passage I'm trying to understand about natural slavery versus conventional slavery." His laugh was bitter. "Ironic, isn't it?" "May I?" Catherine reached for the book. Isaiah hesitated, then handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, and both pulled back as if burned. Catherine read the passage aloud, her voice steady and clear. Then she said, "Aristotle was wrong. There's no such thing as natural slavery. My father is wrong. Thomas Whitfield is wrong. This entire system is built on a lie." Isaiah stared at her. "You really believe that?" "With everything I am." Something shifted between them at that moment. Isaiah pulled out another book, then another. Soon they were sitting across from each other at the small table, debating philosophy and politics, their voices rising with passion and falling to whispers when they remembered how dangerous this was. "Have you read Douglas?" Isaiah asked. "Frederick Douglass." Catherine shook her head. "My father would never allow such books in the house." "I have a copy, hidden. A free black sailor sold it to me for 2 months' worth of extra metalwork." Isaiah's eyes shone with an intensity Catherine had never seen before. "He writes about how slaveholders deliberately keep us ignorant because education is incompatible with slavery. Once you can read, once you can think, you can never truly be enslaved again, not in your mind." They talked until the candle burned low, and the next night they talked again, and the night after that. If you're not subscribed yet, do it now. This story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. It was Catherine who first noticed the ledgers. She'd returned to the main house one afternoon. Her mother had sent word that she was ill and wanted to see her daughter. The visit was brief and painful, her mother weeping over Catherine's ruined state, her father pointedly absent. But on her way out, Catherine passed his study. The door was ajar, and she could see the account books spread across his desk. She shouldn't have looked, but she did. The numbers told a devastating story. Her father was drowning in debt. The tobacco yields had been declining for 3 years. He owed money to banks in Richmond, to merchants in Norfolk, to other plantation owners. At the current rate, he would lose everything within a year, and when that happened, he would have to sell people to cover his debts. Catherine's hands shook as she copied the numbers onto a scrap of paper she'd tucked in her sleeve. That night, she showed them to Isaiah. He studied the figures in silence, his brow furrowed. Finally, he said, "The soil is exhausted. Your father plants the same crop in the same fields year after year. It's killing the land." "You know about farming." "My father's farm in Maryland, we practiced crop rotation. Tobacco 1 year, corn the next, then let the field rest with cover crops. It replenishes the soil." Isaiah's finger traced the numbers. "And his irrigation system is wasteful. I've watched the overseer flood the fields until half the water runs off into the creek. There are better methods." Catherine felt her heart begin to race. "Isaiah, what if we could save the plantation?" He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "We." "Think about it. If the plantation fails, my father will sell people. Families will be separated, children torn from their mothers. But if we could make it profitable again. Your father would never listen to ideas from us, especially not from me." Isaiah's voice was flat, resigned. "Then we don't tell him they're from us." Catherine leaned forward, her eyes bright with desperate hope. "We make him think the ideas are his own. I can alter the ledgers, add notes in his handwriting. You can talk to the overseer, suggest things casually, make him think he thought of them first." "That's dangerous, Catherine, if we're caught." "We're already caught." Her voice rose, then dropped to an urgent whisper. "We're already living in an impossible situation, At least this way we might save some people from being sold away. We might keep families together." Isaiah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "There's a little girl in the quarters, Sarah. She's 8 years old. Last month, I heard the overseer tell her mother that if debts get bad, Sarah will be sold first because young girls bring good prices." His voice cracked. "I watched her mother collapse. I watched Sarah try to understand why her mama was screaming. So yes, let's try." They worked through the night, planning every detail. Catherine would doctor the account books, adding suggestions in her father's own hand. Isaiah would implement changes through the overseer, playing the role of the obedient slave, offering helpful observations. It was dangerous, it was possibly futile, but it was something. The hook is about to get even deeper. Comment below what you think happens next, and don't forget to like this video. 2 months later, the first changes began to show results. The fields Isaiah had suggested rotating were producing better yields. The new irrigation ditches he'd helped the overseer design were saving water and improving crop health. Colonel Ashford noticed, though he attributed the improvements to his own management decisions and the overseer's newfound competence. Catherine and Isaiah worked in stolen moments, their partnership deepening with each passing day. They were no longer strangers forced together, but collaborators in a dangerous game. And somewhere along the way, something else happened. Catherine began to notice the way Isaiah's face softened when he talked about the children in the quarters. Isaiah began to notice the fierce determination in Catherine's eyes when she talked about justice. They began to notice each other. One night, after successfully implementing another improvement, they sat together at the table, exhausted but exhilarated. Catherine reached across and took Isaiah's hand. "We are doing it. We're actually making a difference." Isaiah didn't pull away. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made Catherine's breath catch. "Catherine, this thing between us. I know it's illegal, it's dangerous, it could get us both killed." "That's not what I was going to say." Isaiah's dark eyes met hers. "I was going to say that I've never met anyone like you, that working with you these past months has made me feel more free than I've felt in 14 years. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "That you love me," Catherine whispered. "Because I love you, Isaiah. I love your mind, your kindness, your strength. I love who I am when I'm with you." The kiss was inevitable, soft at first, then deeper, years of loneliness and pain giving way to something fierce and true. When they pulled apart, both were crying. "This can't end well," Isaiah said, his forehead pressed against hers. "You know that, don't you?" "I don't care. Right now, at this moment, I choose this. I choose you, I choose us." But choosing each other was only the beginning, because 3 weeks later, everything fell apart. Colonel Ashford's creditors arrived on a humid July morning, their carriages raising dust clouds that could be seen from the slave quarters. Catherine watched from the cabin window, her stomach churning with dread. Isaiah came up behind her, his hand finding hers. "This is it," he said quietly. "Whatever happens now, know that these months with you have been worth everything." The summons came within the hour. Catherine was ordered to the main house. But this time, Isaiah walked with her, something he'd never dared before. At the door, the butler tried to stop him. "The colonel sent for his daughter, not for you." Isaiah's voice was steady. "Where she goes, I go." They found Colonel Ashford in his study, surrounded by 3 grim-faced men in dark suits, the creditors. Her father's face was grey, aged 10 years since Catherine had last seen him up close. When he saw her, something like desperation flickered in his eyes. "Gentlemen," he said heavily, "this is my daughter Catherine." One of the creditors, a thin man with wire spectacles, looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. "This is the girl you married off to a slave? Good God, Ashford." "I need to sell 30 slaves by month's end to cover my debts," her father said, ignoring the comment. His voice was hollow, defeated. 30 people, half my workforce. It will destroy this plantation, but I have no choice." This is where everything changes. You need to see what Catherine does next. Catherine felt Isaiah tense beside her. 30 people, families destroyed, children sold away, everything they'd worked for meaningless. But then she looked at the ledgers on her father's desk, the ones she and Isaiah had been secretly improving, the latest numbers, the increasing yields, the reduced costs. "No," she said. Every head turned toward her. No, her father repeated, his voice dangerous. There's another way. Catherine walked to the desk, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Give me 3 months, and I'll save this plantation. I'll make it profitable enough to satisfy your creditors without selling a single person. The thin creditor laughed. What could you possibly know about running a plantation? Catherine looked at Isaiah. He gave her the smallest nod. Together, they'd prepared for this moment, though neither had been sure it would come. Everything, Catherine said. She picked up the ledgers and began to speak. She explained crop rotation, irrigation efficiency, soil conservation. She presented detailed plans for diversification, for new crops that would fetch better prices in Richmond markets. She showed them the improvements already implemented, the yields already increasing. Her voice grew stronger with each word, her father's face shifting from shock to confusion to something that might have been grudging respect. When she finished, the room was silent. Finally, the thin creditor spoke. And where did you learn all this, Miss Ashford? Catherine didn't hesitate. From Isaiah, the man my father gave me to. He knows more about farming, about efficiency, about running a successful operation than anyone on this plantation, including my father, including your overseer. If you give us 3 months, we'll prove it. Her father's face flushed red. Catherine. But the creditors were looking at Isaiah now, really looking at him for the first time. One of them, older than the others, leaned forward. Can you do what she says? Isaiah met his gaze steadily. Yes, sir, I can. It's irregular, the thin creditor said, but he was wavering. Highly irregular. So is bankruptcy, the older creditor replied dryly. 3 months, Ashford. But if this fails, we'll take not 30 slaves but 50, including this one. He pointed at Isaiah. Make sure you're subscribed, because the ending will leave you speechless. Hit that subscribe button right now. The next 3 months were a blur of backbreaking work. Catherine and Isaiah barely slept, coordinating improvements, training workers, negotiating with merchants. The overseer, threatened with his own job loss, reluctantly implemented Isaiah's suggestions. New crops were planted, old systems were overhauled, and slowly, impossibly, the plantation began to transform. Catherine and Isaiah worked as partners, as equals, though they had to hide it from everyone. Late at night, alone in their cabin, they allowed themselves to be honest, to plan not just for the plantation, but for a future that seemed impossible. When this works, Catherine whispered one night, when we save this place, I'm going to ask my father to free you. Isaiah pulled her close, and if he refuses, then we run, we go north. Together. Leave everyone else behind. Catherine was quiet. They both knew the truth. They couldn't save everyone, but maybe, just maybe, they could save some. September came, and with it, the reckoning. The creditors returned, ledgers in hand, ready to make their judgments. The whole plantation seemed to hold its breath. The older creditor studied the numbers for what felt like hours. Finally, he looked up. I'll be damned, you did it. Not only are you current on your debts, Colonel, but you're showing a profit. Her father's relief was palpable, but the thin creditor wasn't satisfied. And you say this slave is responsible. He is, Catherine said firmly. Isaiah saved this plantation. He saved 30 families from being torn apart. He deserves his freedom. The words hung in the air. Her father's face went through a series of expressions: anger, pride, confusion, resignation. Finally, he spoke. Gentlemen, could you give me a moment with my daughter? When they were alone, Isaiah waiting anxiously outside, Colonel Ashford looked at Catherine with something approaching wonder. You've changed, girl. No, father. I've finally become who I always was. You just couldn't see it. This slave, Isaiah, you love him. It wasn't a question, but Catherine answered anyway. Yes, with everything I am. Her father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I can't free him, Catherine. The laws in Virginia, a freed slave has to leave the state within a year or be enslaved again. And there are neighbors who would challenge it, who would make trouble. But, he paused, I can pay him wages. I can give him more freedom than most, and when the time is right, when circumstances change. He didn't finish, but Catherine understood. It wasn't everything, but it was something. 6 months later, in early 1857, Catherine and Isaiah stood at the edge of the tobacco fields, watching the sun rise over land they'd saved together. Isaiah was now the plantation's paid manager, a position almost unheard of for an enslaved man. They still lived in the small cabin, but now by choice rather than punishment. 4 more years, Isaiah said quietly, and everything's going to change. You can feel it in the air, war is coming. Catherine took his hand, no longer caring who saw. We helped each other survive this, we'll survive what comes next. They couldn't marry, not legally. They couldn't be free, not truly. But they had each other and they had hope. And sometimes, in impossible times, hope was enough. What would you have done in their situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Their real journey was just beginning.